It was the 9th of March, 1860, and 11 o'clock at night. The sea and sky were as one, and the eye could pierce but a few fathoms into the gloom. Through the raging sea, over which the waves broke with a livid light, a little ship was driving under almost bare poles. She was a schooner of 100 tons. Her name was the Sleuth. In this latitude, at the beginning of March, the nights are short. The day would dawn about 5 o'clock. But would the dangers that threatened the schooner grow less when the sun illumined the sky? Was not the frail vessel at the mercy of the waves? Undoubtedly, and only the calming of the billows and the lulling of the gale could save her from that most awful of shipwrecks, a foundering in the open sea far from any coast on which the survivors might find safety. In the stern of the schooner were 3 boys, one about 14, the 2 others about 13 years of age. It was a difficult task, and hurl them against the bulwarks. Just before midnight such a wave came thundering against the stern that it was a wonder the rudder was not unshipped. The boys were thrown backwards by the shock. "Does she still steer?" asked one of them. "Ease, Gordon," answered Bryant, who had coolly resumed his place. "Hold on tight, Donegan," he continued, "and don't be afraid. But we must keep the yacht before the wind, or we shall be pooped." 2 little heads appeared above the level of the deck. "What is the matter?" "Nothing, Iverson, nothing," returned Bryant. "Idjit down again with Dole, and look sharp, war awfully frightened down here," said the other boy. "Wall of you?" asked Donegan. "Ease, all of us," said Dole. "Well, get back again," said Bryant. "Shut up. There's another wave." A violent blow shook the yacht's stern. This time, fortunately, the wave did not come on board, for if the water had swept down the companion, the yacht would have been swamped. "Idjit back, will you?" shouted Gordon. "Go down, or I'll come after you. Look here," said Bryant. "Go down, you young uns." The 2 heads disappeared, and at the same moment another boy appeared in the doorway. "Do you want us, Bryant?" "No, Baxter. Let you and Cross and Webb and Service and Wilcox stop with the little ones. We 4 can manage." Baxter shut the door from within. "Ease, all of us," Dole had said. But were there only little boys on board this schooner thus driven before the storm? Yes, only boys. And how many were there? 15, counting Gordon, Bryant, Donegan, and the negro. How came they to be here? That you shall know shortly. Was there not a man on the yacht? Not a captain to look after it? Not a sailor to give a hand in its management? Not a helmsman to steer in such a storm? No, not one. And more than that, there was not a person on board who knew the schooner's position on the ocean. And what ocean? The largest of all, the Pacific, which stretches for 6,000 miles from Australia and New Zealand to the coast of South America. What then had happened? Had the schooner's crew disappeared in some catastrophe? Had the Malay pirates carried them off and left on board only this batch of boys from 14 downwards? A yacht of 100 tons ought to have a captain, a mate, and 5 or 6 men, and of these all that had been left was the nigger boy. Where did the schooner come from? From what Australian port or oceanic archipelago did she hail? How long had she been at sea? Whither was she bound? The boys would probably have been able to answer these questions had they been asked them by any captain speaking the schooner on her course, but there was no vessel in sight, neither steamer nor sailing ship, and had there been one, Bryant and his friends did their utmost to keep the schooner straight ahead. "What is to be done?" asked Donegan. "All we can to save ourselves, Heaven helping us," answered Bryant, although even the most energetic man might have despaired under such circumstances. The gale blew in thunderclaps, as the sailors say, and the expression was only too true. The schooner had lost her mainmast, gone about 4 feet above the partners, so that no treesail could be set under which she might have been more easily steered. The foremast still held, but the shrouds had stretched, and every minute it threatened to crash on to the deck. The fore staysail had been split to ribbons, and kept up a constant cracking, as if a rifle were being fired. The only sail that remained sound was the foresail. If it were to go, the schooner could not be kept before the wind, the waves would board her over the quarter, and she would go down. Not an island had been sighted. To run ashore was a terrible thing to do, a lee shore, and so they looked ahead for some light to which they could steer. But there was no light in that thick darkness. Suddenly, about 1 o'clock, a fearful crash was heard above the roaring of the storm. "Ither goes the foremast," said Donegan. "No," said Moko. "You remain at the wheel. Gordon, with Donegan and Moko, come and help me." Bryant was not quite ignorant of things nautical. On his voyage out from Europe he had crossed the North Atlantic and Pacific. Bryant and the negro rushed forward. At all costs the foresail must be cut adrift, for it had caught and was bellying out in such a way that the schooner was in danger of capsizing, and if that happened she could never be righted, unless the mast were cut away and the wire shrouds broken. And how could the boys manage that? Bryant and Moko set to work with remarkable judgment. Their object was to keep as much sail on the schooner as possible. They slacked off the halyards and let the sail down to within 4 or 5 feet of the deck, and they cut off the torn strips with their knives. 20 times, at least, were they in danger of being swept away by the waves. Under her very small spread of canvas the schooner could still be kept on her course, and though the wind had so little to take hold of, she was driven along at the speed of a torpedo boat. The faster she went the better. Her safety depended on her going faster than the waves, so that none could follow and board her. Bryant and Moko were making their way back to the wheel when the door of the companion again opened. A boy's head again appeared. This time it was Jack, Bryant's brother, and 3 years his junior. "What do you want, Jack?" "A come here," said Jack. "A fairy's water in the saloon." Bryant rushed down the companion stairs. The saloon was confusedly lighted by a lamp. Its light revealed a dozen boys lounging on the couches around. The youngest other were some as young as Hightower huddling against each other in fear. "Ither is no danger," said Bryant, wishing to give them confidence. "You are all right. Don't be afraid. Whence came this water? Did it come from a leak? That must be ascertained at once." Forward of the saloon was the day saloon, then the dining saloon, and then the crew's quarters. Bryant went through these in order, and found that the water had been taken in from the seas dashing over the bows, down the fore companion, which had not been quite closed, and that it had been run aft by the pitching of the ship. There was thus no danger on this head. Bryant stopped to cheer up his companions as he went back through the saloon, and then returned to his place at the helm. The schooner was very strongly built, and had only just been recoppered, so that she might withstand the waves for some time. It was then about 1 o'clock. The darkness was darker than ever, and the dark clouds still gathered, and more furiously than ever raged the storm. The yacht seemed to be rushing through a liquid mass that flowed above, beneath, and around her. The shrill cry of the petrel was heard in the air. Did its appearance mean that land was near? No, for it is often met with hundreds of miles at sea. And, in truth, an hour later there was another report from the bow. What remained of the foresail had been split to ribbons, and the strips flew off into space like huge seagulls. "We have no sail left. If that is your style of seamanship, look out for the wave astern," said Moko. "Alas yourselves, or you'll be swept overboards." The boy had not finished the sentence when several tons of water came with a leap over the taffrail. Bryant, Donegan, and Gordon were hurled against the companion, to which they managed to cling. But the negro had disappeared in the wave, which had swept the deck from stern to bow, carrying away the binnacle, a lot of spare spars, and the 3 boats which were swinging to the davits inboard. The deck was cleared at one blow, but the water almost instantly flowed off. "Moko, Moko," shouted Bryant as soon as he could speak. See if he's gone overboard," said Donegan. "No," said Gordon, leaning out to leeward. "No, I don't see him, and I don't hear him." "Moko?" "There, help," replied the negro. "'Tis not in the sea," said Gordon. "If his voice comes from the bow ease'll save him," said Bryant, and he crept forward along the heaving, slippery deck, avoiding as best he might the blocks swinging from the ropes that were all adrift. The boy's voice was heard again, and then all was silent. By great effort Bryant reached the fore companion. He shouted. There was no response. Had Moko been swept away into the sea since he uttered his last cry? If so, he must be far astern now, for the waves could not carry him along as fast as the schooner was going. And then he was lost. No? A feeble cry reached Bryant, who hurried to the windlass in the frame of which the foot of the bowsprit was fitted. There he found the negro stuck in the very angle of the bow. A halyard was tightening every instant round his neck. He had been saved by it when the wave was carrying him away. Was he now to be strangled by it? Bryant opened his knife. Moko was then dragged aft, and as soon as he had recovered strength enough to speak, "Thanks, Massa Bryant," he said, and immediately resumed his place at the wheel, where the four did their utmost to keep the yacht safe from the enormous waves that now ran behind them, for the waves now ran faster than the yacht. But what could be done? It was impossible to set the least scrap of sail. In the southern hemisphere the month of March corresponds to that of September in the northern, and the nights are shorter than the days. About 4 o'clock the horizon would grow grey in the east, whither the schooner was being borne. With daybreak the storm might lull. Perhaps land might be in sight, and the fate of the schooner's passengers be settled in a few minutes. About 4:30 a diffused light began to appear overhead. Unfortunately the mist limited the range of view to less than a quarter of a mile. The clouds swept by with terrible rapidity. The storm had lost nothing of its fury, and but a short distance off the sea was hidden by the veil of spray from the raging waves. The schooner at one moment mounting the wave crest, at the next hurled into the trough, the four boys looked out at the chaos of wild water. They felt that if the calm was long in coming their situation would be desperate. It was impossible that the schooner could float for another day. But suddenly there came a cry from Moko of a land. Land! Was he mistaken? Nothing is more difficult than to recognize the vague lineaments of land, which are so easily confounded with those of the clouds. "A land," exclaimed Bryant Ease, replied Moko. "A land to the eastward," and he pointed towards a part of the horizon now hidden by a mass of vapours. "Yar you sure?" asked Donegan. Ease ascertained," said Moko. "If the mist opens again you look three a little to the right of the foremast look." The mist began to open and rise from the sea. A few moments more and the ocean reappeared for several miles in front of the yacht. "Ease land, it is really land," shouted Bryant. "And land that is very low," added Gordon, who had just caught sight of the indicated coast. There was now no room for doubt. A land, a continent, or island lay some 5 or 6 miles ahead, along a large segment of the horizon, in the direction she was going, and which the storm would not allow her to deviate from. The schooner would be driven on it in less than an hour. That she would be smashed, particularly if breakers stopped her before she reached the shore. But the boys did not give that a thought. In this land, which had offered itself so unexpectedly to their sight, they saw, they could only see, a means of safety. And now the wind blew with still greater strength. In the background was a cliff. Ah! If the schooner could reach the sandy beach without meeting with a line of reefs, if the mouth of a river would only offer a refuge, her passengers might perhaps escape safe and sound. Leaving Donegan, Gordon, and Moko at the helm, Bryant went forward and examined the land which he was nearing so rapidly. But in vain did he look for some place in which the yacht could be run ashore without risk. There was the mouth of no river or stream, not even a sandbank on which they could run her aground, but there was a line of breakers, with the black heads of rock rising amid the undulations of the surge, where at the first shock the schooner would be wrenched to pieces. It occurred to Bryant that it would be better for all his friends to be on deck when the crash came, and opening the companion door he shouted down, "A comb on deck." Every one of you immediately out jumped the dog, and then the 11 boys one after the other. It was a little before 6 in the morning when the schooner reached the first line of breakers. "Hold on, all of you," shouted Bryant, stripping off half his clothes, so as to be ready to help those whom the surf swept away, for the vessel would certainly strike. Suddenly there came a shock. The schooner had grounded under the stern, but the hull was not damaged, and no water rushed in. A second wave took her 50 feet further, just skimming the rocks that run above the water level in quite 1,000 places. Then she heeled over to port and remained motionless, surrounded by the boiling surf. She was not in the open sea, but she was a quarter of a mile from the beach.